having two chapters today, 1 Samuel 11 and 12. Chapter 11 is a small chapter, not too many verses in it, and so we will go ahead with chapter 12 also. Beginning with verse 1, then, 1 Samuel 11, then Nahash the Ammonite came and encamped against Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh Gilead said unto Nahash, make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee. So, Nahash was, by the way, his name means serpent, but he was he was decided to take back the country around Nahash Gilead, that country that the Israelites had at this time. Like I said, his name means giant. His name means serpent, but he was the Ammonite, and the Ammonites were a country that, according to Deuteronomy 2:20, and we won't turn there, but according to that scripture, it was a country that was full of giants, and it was a country that there was a lot of wickedness going on. And they were giants, and they were tall men, taller than the normal men. And so the men of Jabesh Gilead were frightened whenever Nahash wanted to come and wanted to take over their country back again, because that country for a while was in the hand of the Ammonites, into their possession. But Jephthah was a man that you probably all remember the story where he came and fought against them, against the Ammonites, and won the victory. And so, but that had been about 90 years before. And so Jabesh Gilead was in the hand of the Israelites all through that period of time, about 90 years. And Nahash decided, well, it's time for us to take this country back again. And so he told them that what he was going to do, that was the covenant that he was talking to, that Jabesh Gilead were talking to him about. And so when he let them know he was going to come and fight them, well, the people in Jabesh Gilead says, well, wait a while. That's what he meant by making a covenant with us, and we will serve thee. Just give us a little time to see if we can get some help. And Nabash, verse 2, Nabash the Ammonite answered them, on this one condition will I make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out all your right eyes and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel. That I may thrust out all your right eyes. Now, if they had let him thrust out all their right eyes, they couldn't have fought at all, because when they would fight, their shields, they would fight with bows and arrows, and their shields would cover completely their left eye. And so if their right eyes were completely gone, they wouldn't have been able to fight. That's why I said to cut out all your right eyes. But can you imagine? It's hard for me to imagine that these men of Israel in Nabash Gilead were willing to, said, give us a little time, and if we can't find help, we'll come and let you do that. They weren't willing to fight at all. So if they said, just give us time. If in 7 days they asked for, in that 7 days, I'm sure Nahash didn't think that they would be able to get the help they needed to fight against him, because most of them were afraid. Most of Israel were afraid of the Ammonites. And so 7 days, that wasn't very long. So he says, okay, I'll wait 7 days. And so he did. Because they asked for that little bit of time, and Nahash agreed to it, then this didn't happen. They didn't have to have all their eyes put out and lose their country also. It didn't happen. So Nahash says, okay, well, I'll wait that long. And then in verse 3, the elders of Jabesh said unto him, give us 7 days, and I went ahead of myself, and respite, and I'll go into all the coasts of Israel, that's the borders of Israel, all of the Israel. And if there be no man to save us, we will come out to thee. So if they couldn't find anyone to save them, they said, we'll just come out and let you put out all of our right eyes, and we would serve you then the rest of our lives.
So they would serve him, but not fight him. Is that it?
Yeah, they would rather serve him the rest of their lives with only one eye than to fight at this point in time. They were afraid of them. Why didn't they themselves ask for more time or just say something to make them wait and at least try to find more help? Or why didn't they call on God? That was my next question. That didn't seem to be in their mind at all to ask God for help. And God had helped them so much, so many times, and they had had to fight battles, and God had helped them. But they didn't seem to even think about asking God for help.
It showed their spiritual state.
I can tell you one reason.
Okay.
Men want to do what they want to do. Men are strong, and they think they can fix this. I've watched men enough.
That's true of men thinking they can fix it. But evidently these men didn't think that.
Well, they should have asked God. They were going to do it.
Oh, yes, they should have asked God. But anyway, they didn't. They said, just give us 7 days. And so Nahash agreed to that, to give him 7 days. And so then in verse 4, then came the messengers to Gibeah of Saul, that's where Saul lived, and told the tidings in the ears of the people. And all the people there lifted up their voices. Did they say, okay, we'll go and help you? They started crying themselves. All the people wept. It just shows what a terrible place Israel had come to. Most of Israel had come where they weren't at all thinking about asking God for help. And God had helped them so much. Verse 5, and behold, Saul came after the herd out of the field. So that was they were in the country close to where Saul was. And he had been out, now he had been anointed king, but what do we see him doing here?
The herd.
Working in the same thing that he had been raised in. He went right back to his occupation of taking care of the herd of animals. But he came then out of the field, and all the men, the people in that area were crying, weeping. And so he says, what's wrong? What's going on? And he said, what aileth the people that they weep? And they told the tidings of the men of Jabesh. So the men told Saul when he came in what was going on. And notice the next verse. The Spirit of God came upon Saul. So the Lord is so loving. Even though none of them thought about asking God and didn't try to ask God for anything, God moved on Saul's spirit. Saul was the king. God was helping him on every hand, trying to cause him to turn to the Lord and let God help them in that way. But you can know, says the Spirit of God came upon Saul. So God moved anyway, even though they didn't ask him and they were trying to figure things out for themselves. Saul wouldn't have known what to do if God hadn't shown him. But I believe God shown him exactly what to do. That's what we see when it says the Spirit of God came upon Saul. And when he heard those tidings, and his anger was kindled greatly. This was,
Last week, Nellie, you said that giving them Saul because of the kind of man he was, that this was the best that the world had to offer.
yes,
See, and so this is happening just like God knew. They didn't go to God, they went to the king.
yes.
You see, which is what
But
there's a downfall.
they didn't go to the king. The king had to come to them. And of course, that's God that caused Saul to come up at this point in time and heard them all weeping.
They send messengers to Jabesh.
They sent them to everyone.
Yeah, they just sent him all over to everyone. And so when Saul came and saw them all weeping, well, then the Spirit of God came upon him. So you see that God was working no matter who went to him or who didn't, and none of them did. Even Saul didn't until we see the Spirit of God came upon him. When Saul came and asked, well then God intervened and caused Saul to know just what to do. He gave Saul the information that he needed, but Saul, even at that point, Saul hadn't asked until the Spirit of God came upon him. To me, it just shows God's loving hand, even though it had been years since Israel had given him any place at all in their lives. It had been many years, and yet they needed the help, and God sees everything that's going on, whether we go to him or not. He sees it. But if our heart is right at all, he will come in and help us. And this is what Israel's heart wasn't as it should have been, but God had chosen them, and God was going to see that they would go to him and that they would let him help them. God is behind everything. Even in our lives, when things occur we don't understand, if we will realize that God is still in control, it will give us much peace in our hearts. We won't have to worry because God loves us, and He's going to work for us if we will let him at all. And so here, when Saul heard that, in verse 7, he took a yoke of oxen and hewed them in pieces and sent them throughout all the coasts of Israel by the hands of messengers, saying, whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done unto his oxen. And the fear of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out with one consent. This word hewed, which says they hewed them in pieces, that is a word that was always used for when the animal had already died. Then they would hew them in pieces for sacrifices or for whatever it was needed for. But so this probably is when he took a yoke of oxen, it was ones that had already been killed for some reason or died.
Put it in something? The dead oxen?
Oh, yes. He put them in a carrier of some kind and sent them through messengers all over the country and told them, the Lord is the one that showed him what to say, what to do, and what to say about it. I don't believe Saul would have known to do that, but and that's just my thinking. Maybe he would have, but anyway.
I think it's a blessing how God was the one that just picked him for king,
Yes.
but didn't leave him on his own. He didn't have to come up with all the...
Tell him what to do.
God also gave him the ability.
Yeah.
That's part of the turning into another man, I bet.
Yes,
He gave him the ability to be king, and he wouldn't have had that on his own.
that's right.
You know, if God asks us to do something, he's going to do the same thing, give us the ability to do it.
Yes, he does. If he asks anything of us, he'll give us the ability to do it. He'll give us the strength and whatever is needed. So they came, then says the fear of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out with one consent. I'm starting in verse 8 now. And when he numbered them in Bezek, the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah were 30,000. remember at this point of time, Israel and was divided into two groups. One was 10 tribes of Israel, and 2 tribes were in Judah. But they were working together here.
I thought that happened
That was
later.
Yeah. You mean the division?
Yeah, that didn't come until after Solomon's son was
Yeah.
the dividing of the tribes.
Yeah, you're right there. But here it was divided in coming in answer to this need. So anyway, there were 330,000 men that came. And in verse 9, they said unto the messengers that came, Thus shall ye say unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, tomorrow, now this is what message they sent back to Nahash. Tomorrow by that time the sun will be hot, you shall have help. They told Jabesh Gilead that. And the messengers came and showed it to the men of Jabesh, and they were glad. I guess they were. Therefore, verse 10, the men of Jabesh said, and this is what they told Nahash, tomorrow we will come out unto you, and you shall do with us all that seemeth good unto you. So Nahash thought, okay, tomorrow I'm going to put out all their eyes, and then they'll be my servants. That's what they said, tomorrow we'll come out. Well, they came out. Notice verse 11. And it was so on the morrow that Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the host in the morning watch, and slew the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And it came to pass that they which remained were scattered, so that 2 of them were not left together. There was a real slaughter there. Nahash was completely beaten, and Jabesh Gilead, the men there and of all of Israel, had a wonderful victory.
It's probably the first time that Israel had fought together in, what, 9
In a
years? Or
long time, yes. They fought together. There's always good that comes out of hard things. The Lord is so faithful. So, see if I'm leaving out a lot of...
In 12?
She said it hasn't started yet.
Yeah, I will start on verse 12. It says, just seeing some of my notes. So we'll go ahead with verse 12. And the people said unto Samuel, Who is he that said, Shall Saul reign over us? Bring them in that we may put them to death. So now they've changed. How fickle people are. And we're the same way today. We can change just like that. By what we see, not by what we believe God for, but by what we see. It causes us to change or to do what we should do or not do what we shouldn't do, whatever. So they came in verse 13, and Saul said, There shall not a man be put to death. See, the people, let's just put these people to death that had said, remember when after Saul was anointed king, part of the people really rejoiced and was glad, but there was a part of them that said, oh, we don't believe that he should be king, we won't serve him. And so that's the ones that Saul was talking about here. And the people were, and they said, let's put them to death. Saul said, There shall not a man be put to death on this day, for today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. See, his heart was changed. Now he is giving God the glory. The people were giving Saul the glory for this. But the people are so fickle that they could have been turned, and a lot of them were, when in just little something happened that they didn't like, then they wouldn't have been giving Saul any glory. But Saul wouldn't let them do that. And that shows that he had a different heart. He was doing well. He was Samuel told him at one time, when you were little in your own eyes, God blessed you. But now he had turned, well, which we'll study about later, he had turned, and so God couldn't continue blessing him. But in verse 14, then said Samuel to the people, come and let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there. He wanted to go and make it more certain that Saul was the king. That word renew has the meaning of rebuild or repair the kingdom. He wanted to make it just definite that Saul was the king. In verse 15, all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. And there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. So this was a wonderful time of victory for Israel. They had won this battle, and they were giving God the glory. And Alice, what did the peace offerings, what were they for?
Fellowship. Is that what?
For fellowship, yes. God ordained the peace offerings. He ordained, 7 offerings?
Mm-hmm.
7 different offerings. It's been a while since I've studied about the offerings. I need to get into it again.
I taught this 3 times up there, and I can't remember half of it.
Anyway, the peace offerings, I remember when I studied that was such a blessing to me, because it showed not only fellowship with God, they were offering sacrifices to God, but then they would eat some of that sacrifice, some of that animal that they had killed, and enjoy fellowship together. They enjoyed fellowship with God, but then also together. And that's what God wants of us today. He wants us to worship Him and have fellowship with God, but He also wants us to have fellowship one with another. That's why He has said, forget not the assembling of yourselves together, as the manner of some is. And so many people today, especially since this COVID problem, so many people are saying, well, I don't have to go to church now. I can get the lessons online and hear. I'm thankful for the ones that get the lessons online, but they should, by all means, be going to church and get the many lessons there.
I so loved it when, I don't know what you guys call it, when you had that thing up there and played all those games in that far thing. That was just, I don't remember what it was. What was it for? And we hadn't been coming too long here. Well, what was that you had? Was it a party? It was some kind of party.
Probably a harvest. Was it a
Harvest
harvest?
It might
festival?
have, yeah, that was just so
Something.
fun, and we ought to do things like that. It made everybody closer.
Yes, and when we have picnics together,
I get dirty.
Picnics are wonderful too. You know, God ordained those times.
Yeah.
He ordained them for the Israelites to get together and different of those feasts that they had called them feasts, and they would spend time together. That helps us.
What is neat is that Feast of Tabernacles. They build a home outside of their home.
Yes,
To get away from the cares of this life.
that's right.
And they rejoice. It's such a neat time.
It
Well,
was.
it indoors or
It
outdoors?
was outdoors. I would have enjoyed it.
Yes. Anyway, here it says they rejoiced greatly, and they did. And so then we'll go on in chapter 12 and see what happened after that. This is interesting also. In verse 1, and Samuel said unto all Israel, behold, I have hearkened unto your voice in all that you said unto me, and have made a king over you. And now, behold, the king walketh before you, and I am old and gray-headed. I am old and gray-headed too.
Well, a lot of us are.
Anyway, behold, my sons are with you, and I have walked before you from my childhood unto this day. How old was Samuel when he first started?
I don't remember, but he was an old man. He didn't.
No,
No,
when he
Samuel, when he first started ministering
That's what I'm
for the
Could have
Lord.
been 6, 7,
talking
8 years
Oh,
old,
that's
something.
right, yes.
Whenever he was weaned, at whatever age that was. We're not sure just when that was, but he was very,
So
just
all of his
weaned.
life,
He was just a
by and
little
large.
boy.
Just a little boy. But he was, his mother took him and he was there with Eli, who was not a very good priest.
So precious.
and the Lord started dealing with him, spoke to him right when he was very young, and he couldn't even understand that it was the Lord until Eli told him. But anyway, so all those years, Samuel had been a leader, and as he grew older, and then Eli died, and so he was the leader then. He was the judge for them. And that's what Samuel is telling them. Verse 3, behold, here I am, witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed, whose ox have I taken, and whose ass have I taken, or whom have I defrauded, whom have I oppressed, or of whose hand have I received any bribe to blind mine eyes therewith, and I will restore it to you. What he's saying here are things that many of their kings were doing after they started having kings. Many of their kings were not honest, and they would do all of these things. But Samuel hadn't done any of those things. He had been their leader for years, and most of those years that he was leading, they were not receiving him as the leader. They were not obeying him. They were doing their own thing. And that's where it says every man did what was right in his own eyes. And they had all kinds of trouble. But Samuel didn't enter into all of those wicked things with the people. He was an honest man, and he was wanting them to realize that and to remember that. And he was saying all of these things to give a foundation for what he's going to be telling them next. He wanted them to understand that and realize it. Verse 4, they said, thou hast not defrauded us, nor oppressed us, neither hast thou taken aught of any man's hand. They acknowledged that he hadn't done any of those things. And he said unto them, the Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that you have not found aught at my hand. And they answered, he is witness. Samuel wanted it to be settled in their heart that he had been a righteous leader, a leader that was leading them. If they had let him lead, he was leading them in the right way, and they shouldn't have wanted something different. And then in verse 6, pardon me, Samuel said unto the people, it is the Lord that advanced Moses and Aaron, and that brought your fathers up out of the land of Egypt. Now, why would he be asking this? Or why would he direct their minds way back to Moses and Aaron? They weren't even living during that time. Why would he be doing that?
I don't know. I think it's kind of like Moses did. He rehearsed their history at least 3 different times through Deuteronomy and Numbers, over and over again, reminding them about who God was and how he had led them and how he had taken care of them. It's just all trying to point them back to God, that they belong to God and that God was taking care.
That's right. I think that is the reason that Samuel did this. He wanted to direct their minds back to God and how God had taken care of Israel all through those years, even though Israel for so many times had turned away from God and had served and worshipped idols instead of their true God. And Samuel was wanting them to remember that, remember what God had done. And you know, the Lord wants us to do that today also. That's why he wants us to read the Word and see how he has helped in all of every time when they needed help. And he wants us to remember in our own lives how he has helped, especially if we have been Christians for most of our life. Remember, he wants us to remember those things. That increases our faith to know that he will continue helping. He's not going to leave us without the help that we need. He has helped us in the past. The Apostle Paul brings that out in 2 Corinthians 3. He says that God had helped him in the past, and so he knows that he's going to continue helping him in the future. He wants us to remember those things. Sometimes it's good to people write in journals. That's something that's hard for me to do. To me, it just kind of seems like it's a waste of time to sit there and write. But it really isn't. It's what God wants us to think on these things and remember them and praise the Lord for them. And that does increase our faith.
We talked about this before, about Ebenezer. Is that the God of our help? But we studied that just in Samuel.
Yes. God of our help, Ebenezer.
The God of our help? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I can't remember the situation.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, right here in 7:12. Then Samuel took a stone and set it between Mitzvah and Shin and called the name of it Ebenezer,
Oh, yes.
saying, hitherto hath the Lord helped us. So
Yeah.
the Philistines, what am I talking about? The Philistines being subdued.
Yeah, and he did help them with the Philistines. And they had forgotten all of that. Now they've said, okay, we'll go let him put our eyes out. How foolish people are. And I should say how foolish we are at times. He wants us to believe God.
It's kind of like when we say, oh, well, I guess we can pray.
Yeah. As a last resort.
We'll give it a try.
Anyway, Samuel told them that the Lord helped Moses and Aaron and brought your fathers up out of the land of Egypt. Now in verse 7, now therefore stand still, that I may reason with you before the Lord of all the righteous acts of the Lord, which he did to you and to your fathers. So again, he's wanting them to remember these things, knowing that that will help them to have faith that the Lord will continue helping them. And then verse 8, when Jacob was come into Egypt, and your fathers cried unto the Lord, then the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, and which brought forth your fathers out of Egypt, and made them dwell in this place. That was such a miracle when God brought them out of Egypt and dried up the river there where they could go across on dry land, that the whole world at that time knew about it. And remember when they started to go across the River Jordan into, oh, I'm sorry. And I can't even find what I did with it.
Wait, it was a long time.
It's somewhere.
Oh, it's in your jacket. There it is. I walked away and went, that's weird.
Well, you'll have to forgive me. Put up with
Makes
it.
the rest of us feel better when ours do that.
Mine doesn't, mine's off.
You don't use yours.
That's right. It's always off.
Anyway, let's come back to Samuel. And Moses and Aaron, how God helped them with Moses and Aaron and dried up the waters for them.
Are we on verse 9?
Yes. Then when they forgot the Lord their God, he sold them into the hand of Sisera, captain of the host of Hazor, and into the hand of the Philistines, and that hadn't been too long before that, and into the hand of the king of Moab, and they fought against them. So Samuel is just reminding them of these things that God had already done for them. And verse 10, they cried unto the Lord and said, we have sinned because we have forsaken the Lord and have served Balaam and Ashtaroth. Those are their two gods that they had, false gods. And he says, but now deliver us out of the hand of our enemies, and we will serve thee. So people are still crying out for help from God. Why didn't God say, well, you're on your own now. I helped you enough, and that's...
That's what I said.
Oh, he knew this wouldn't be the last time.
No, he is so patient, so loving and kind and gracious. And we just have to realize that and remember it.
He's a precious Father.
A precious Father, that's right. And so they said, now deliver us. Verse 11, and the Lord sent Zerubbabel and Baden and Jephthah and Samuel, and delivered you out of the hand of your enemies in every side, and you dwelt safe. This word, Bezek, it is said that was probably, let's see, he reminded them they walked before them since childhood, and I'm on 12. Bezek is spelled differently, another man he was talking about. And I don't see it right off, but anyway, he's just reminding them how the Lord has helped them. And Baden and Jephthah, that with Jephthah hadn't been too long before, and Samuel, and some have said that some of the different things that the people that have written said that Samuel is supposed to be Samson, because Samson is the one that another one that helped them out of these terrible times. Samuel hadn't, that is recorded anyway. So I'm not sure about that, but that's what most of your commentaries say. Anyway, he says, delivered you out of the hand of your enemies on every side, and you dwelled safe. Verse 12, and when you saw that Nahash, the king of the children of Ammon, came against you, you said unto me, to the Lord, nay, but a king shall reign over us, when the Lord your God was your king. So this is what Samuel was doing. He was bringing them back to the present now, and how they were doing what their fathers had done in the past. And they said, we want a king to reign over us. And Samuel is telling them, you should have let God be your king. And verse 13, now therefore behold the king whom you have chosen and whom you have desired, and behold the Lord hath set a king over you. It says, so now you've asked for a king, the Lord has given you one now. If you will fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall both ye and your king, also your king, that reigneth over you, continue following the Lord your God. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall the hand of the Lord be against you as it was against your fathers. He's telling them, learn the lessons. You need to learn from the way your fathers have done. Verse 16, now therefore stand and see this great thing which the Lord will do before your eyes. Is it not wheat harvest today? So it was time for them to harvest their wheat, and whenever they would harvest their wheat, God was taking care of them all the time, and he would see to it that it didn't rain. If it would rain when they were trying to harvest the wheat, it would have ruined the wheat. But he said, now it's a time for wheat harvest, and he said, I will call unto the Lord, and he shall send thunder and rain, that you may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord in asking you a king. So he's telling them, I'm going to call unto the Lord, I'm going to pray for there to be thunder and rain. And he said, he is letting them know, if you see that the Lord will answer my prayer, then you can know that what I'm saying is something for you to listen to, something for you to learn from. And he said that you may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done. In verse 18, so Samuel called unto the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day. The Lord doesn't always answer our prayers immediately. In fact, many times he doesn't.
Yeah.
But it was wheat harvest, and the Lord answered Samuel's prayer that very day when sent thunder and rain. I don't know whether they got any good out of their wheat that time or not. It doesn't say, it doesn't tell us. But the Lord did answer his prayer immediately.
And wasn't that what God said would be the sign of a prophet, if what he says comes to pass?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so he said, you will see that you've done a bad thing in asking for a king. Verse 18, so Samuel called unto the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day. All the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. It did what the Lord wanted them to do in answering that prayer immediately. Caused them to believe what Samuel was saying. Verse 19, and all the people said unto Samuel, pray for thy servants unto the Lord thy God, that we die not. For we have added unto all our sins this evil, to ask us a king. God wanted them to see that what they were asking for was not a good thing. What it showed was that they had not accepted, they hadn't accepted Samuel as their leader, and they hadn't accepted God as their real leader. So Samuel, verse 20, said unto the people, fear not, you have done all this wickedness, yet turn not aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. That's what the whole Bible tells us, to serve the Lord with all of our heart. He doesn't want just a part of us serving him. He doesn't want us serving him one day and the next day serving ourselves, doing what we want to do. If we are serving him with all of our heart, we are obeying him every day, and that's what he's wanting. And that's what he's talking about here. Verse 21, and turn ye not aside, for then should ye go after vain things, which cannot profit nor deliver, for they are vain. Anything of the world is a vain thing as compared to God. Don't get your eyes on something of the Lord. What is it that caused Eve to sin in the first place? What caused evil to sin?
She wanted something God hadn't intended for her.
She saw that fruit, and she knew it had been, it was a fruit that would make her wise, but she saw that fruit, and Satan immediately was there to tempt her with it. When we get our eyes on something of the Lord, Satan will immediately come to tempt us to do something if it's against the Lord. And we must recognize those things and say, okay, Lord, I will follow you, not what I'm looking at, not what I'm seeing, if it's of the world. Verse 22, for the Lord will not forsake his people, nor his great name's sake, because it hath pleased the Lord to make you his people. Israel hadn't done anything to cause the Lord to choose them as his chosen people, but he did. He chose them to hold forth his name, to be a light to the world, that there is a God in heaven that loves them. He chose Israel not because of any good thing they had done. And he chose each one of us in the same way. It's not because we have done any great thing, not because we're so good or so this or so that. He just chose us out of his mercy, his grace, and his love. And I thank the Lord for that. But he says, moreover, as for me, God forbid that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you. I mentioned some time back when I was praying for someone and I got tired of praying for him, and I said, well, I'm just not going to pray for him anymore. It's not doing any good. And the Lord really got onto me for that. You don't sin against the Lord. You're sinning against the Lord when you cease to pray for someone. Unless you know. Now, there's one time in the Bible when the Lord told them, don't pray for him anymore. If the Lord tells you that, well, that's okay, but you have to make sure it's the Lord. Not just because you're getting tired of praying. Anyway, he says, only fear the Lord, serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider how great things he hath done for you. And he has, and he wants us to remember them. But if you will still do wickedly, ye shall be consumed, both ye and your king. And so Samuel was warning them, if after all of this, you have seen how the Lord has worked, if you still continue to walk in wickedness and not to obey the Lord with all your heart, then he says, you will be consumed. There will be a repercussion there. God is still God, and God is holy and just and good, and he wants us to serve him and have patience if he doesn't answer us right away, but turn to him for every need that we have. Let him be the first place we go to instead of something or someone else.